I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and welcome to the first bonus video of the Spring Mini Skein mini-series. Tonight, we are going to dye a colorway inspired by my favorite Pokemon in the entire world, Eevee. It actually took me a long time last fall for something else. I was trying to figure out who my favorite Pokemon is. And then it sort of hit me in the face that it's Eevee, and I should have known that it's been Eevee this whole time. Because whenever I play through the games, I often have one of the evolutions in my party. Pokemon is a video game, and you have pocket monsters and you train them and level them up. And most of the time, things level up into, set path. Maybe there could be 2 different variations that they evolve into. Eevee is unique in that it can evolve into 8 different Pokemon, all that have different types. And so it's fun to sort of decide, ooh, I want this Eevee to become this type and things like that. But this potential and possibility of what it can become is what inspired me. I think before I figured out any of the mini skein sets, I knew that this was something that I wanted to create. And so I started brainstorming ways that I could create an Eevee-like base with then a bit of the potential of what it could become on top without having a colorway that is too brown. Because I know a lot of people don't love brown yarn. And so this is what was going through my head as I started planning. And I did go through and pulled and played with some color swatches of Dharma acid dyes, not specifically trying to match colors in the different evolutions, but to try to have colors that fit the range, giving each one a distinct color, but also trying to be a little bit true to these evolutions. Vaporeon, Flareon, Jolteon, Espeon, Umbreon, Leafeon, Glaceon, and Sylveon. That's all their names, in case you're curious. In tonight's video, we're going to dye 4 different yarn bases. 2 of them are the Crazy 8 line from Wool to Dye For. We have Crazy 8 DK and Crazy 8 Worsted. This line is 100% superwash merino wool, and it's 8 ply. There are 4 2 plies all twisted together, and it makes it a very springy and bouncy yarn. I absolutely adore this base. And then for the fingering weight options, I picked 2 new Wool to Dye For yarn bases, Krypton. There's Krypton Fingering, which is 100% superwash merino wool, and then Krypton Sock, which is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon. Both of these bases are 3 ply and also have like a really good bounce and twist to them. And so I was very excited to play around with this new stock yarn base. I'll talk about the colors that I've pulled later on, but let's get back to the base color. I wanted to dye a base that is a little bit variegated. I wanted a couple different tones in there, and I wanted it to be pastel and neutral enough so that way all of the other colors that we've picked will shine. I didn't want to lose some of those colors because the base was too dark. And so we really need to do some swatches, some depths of shade of 2 different browns, Fawn and Pecan Brown, to try to get the tones that would fit our foxy Pokemon and fit these evolution speckles that I would like to do on top of it. To plan out the shades of brown, the pale shades for our foxy Eevee that we want on the yarn, I decided to start by doing some depths of shade of Pecan Brown and Fawn. Off camera, I made some 1% stock solutions of these 2 colors. I used cereal dilutions, starting with 20 milliliters of our 1% stock solution in the first cup, and then removed half a cup of that to carry it down, to dilute things by half for each cup. I do have other videos where I talk more about cereal dilutions, and I'll have one of those linked down below if you want to learn a little bit more. The end result is that we're going to have 5 depths of shade of each color, going from a 0.5% depth of shade at the most saturated and a 0.03% depth of shade at our least saturated. On 20 gram mini skeins of Wool to Dye For's titanium fingering, the 2-ply 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon yarn. I added a cup of water to each cup, then added the 20-gram mini skein, followed by a teaspoon of white vinegar, and set the yarn aside to let the dyes absorb overnight. The deepest I think I would want the Fawn would be around this 0.125% depth of shade. And I think that the deepest I would want the Pecan would be at this lightest, the 0.03 whatever percent depth of shade. And so we're going to use this information to mix some pastel dye. And I'm not good at translating a tonal like this into the hand-painted color that I want, but what we do know is that I want no more than 12.5 milliliters of our 1% stock solution of Fawn on 100 grams. And I also want no more than 3 milliliters of the Pecan Brown on 100 grams of yarn. Now, we'll definitely have to dilute the dyes, because if we took 3 milliliters of Pecan Brown and put it on yarn, we'd end up with a tiny spot of dark brown. So we'll dilute it, but knowing that cap will help us not add too much dye onto our yarn. And so I'm going to set these aside for a couple of days, and then I'll steam set it off camera. Let's go bigger and dye some full skeins. I have some light ideas on how this is going to go down, and it is possible that I'm going to be starting with way too much dye, but we're going to add 30 milliliters of our Fawn dye to 1 liter of water. This is just shy of 3 times as much of the dye that we used, or that we think that we would need. And to 500 milliliters of water, I'm going to add 6 milliliters of our Pecan Brown dye, which is shy of 2 times the amount that we need. And I'm not going to worry about using the same spoon to stir these up. Now in the pan, we have 400 grams of yarn and no acid yet. And I could have squeezed out even more liquid from the pre-soak, but I didn't. And so I guess we have a total of about 6 cups of water here in between our 2 colors. But coming in with it, and it's going to be okay if we have some white on the yarn as well. I can add our dye, and because we've diluted it, this is going to help us sort of spread it out more over our yarn base. And I have a feeling we will be adding some of this to the other side. But even when I pour it on, it feels deep, but we're gonna just kind of squish it out. Now I haven't added acid yet, but since my tap water is slightly acidic and we're not dealing with very much dye, it's possible we may not be seeing what's happening with the dye. Now we do have more Fawn, and so I'm adding just a little bit. And then we're also going to try to help work it through. Again, not worrying if we have some white, just wanting to have some of these tones here on the yarn. And I think maybe with the next round, I might want to use a little bit less of the Fawn, just so we can spread it out more, but it's not doing anything bad for us here. It's just, you know, striking pretty quickly, and so we might want to be able to dilute it even more. Now, one option that we have to aid us with this, one other option would be to have more water in our yarn to start with, but we're adding a lot of this water in with our dyes right now, and you can see I've left some white. I think that's what I want. But we're going to flip this, and it's not even really about having things be in a repeatable kind of way. It's okay for these colors to blend a bit, but it's also okay to have, again, some whites left. But we're just trying to get something that feels soft, something that isn't perfect is my goal here. But I want it to be able to be overall a pastel-ish level of base. I don't want it to be too pigmented or concentrated. I'm gonna get some more water and some more of the Pecan Brown. There was a reason why we did not use very much of that to start, but I'm liking that ratio. Now, one question I have is whether or not this will be something that we can yarn lasagna. Oh man, or not. I don't know if I'd be able to layer even more yarn on top of this to, say, aid with getting even more yarn in one pan. But I'm bringing this Pecan Brown a little bit all over to help deepen the fawn, which was feeling a little bit more orange to me. I'm glad things seem to be striking pretty quickly as we flip again, because we've used only, goodness, maybe about half of the fawn color that I've mixed so far, and I'm just bringing a little more in, breaking up some of these sections of color, and yeah, I'm really liking the direction that this is heading and how neutral things are feeling. I know that this might be a little bit different from where I said that I was headed, but I am really actually very happy. I really like this as our base. We've used a total of 12 milliliters of our Pecan Brown dye on 400 grams of yarn and approximately 15 milliliters of our fawn, because we've used about half of the fawn that I originally mixed here. This is using a lot less of the fawn than what the initial depths of shade really showed me, but I then was able to apply this and dye by feel. I do think I'm gonna mix the fawn at the strength again because I like having some of those deeper patches, but we were able to spread the fawn out a little more all over. And you can see that we do have some dye left in here, a little bit, but we do need to add acid now. So let's add 3 tablespoons of white vinegar. And then we have a choice. We could heat set the yarn here in this pan, at least until the water runs a little bit more clear. And it doesn't have to be for 30 minutes. We will speckle on top of it. Or we could conceivably let it sit for a little while and then steam set it. And so I'm not quite sure the best way to scale this up moving forward. But that direction we go really depends on what's happening in here. Because if I was prepped to speckle today, we could go and remove this and directly do the countertop speckles I want to do. However, I'm planning on doing those speckled rounds starting tomorrow, and I'd like to dye a lot of this. So it does make sense to heat set it. But I think I'm gonna let it sit on the counter for 10 minutes, and then I'm going to add this yarn to a steamer basket, remove all the liquid, rinse it out, and we'll start again with another batch. Okay, it's been a little over 10 minutes. And let's see how we're doing. We don't need to squeeze out all the water, but a bit. Does that have less variation? Well, we're adding speckles, it's fine. Most of the color is in our yarn. I'm now going to go and put this in a steamer basket and steam for 15 to 30 minutes, depending. It depends a little bit on what else is going on. But I'm now going to go remove this because we want to start with no acid, and we're gonna go on again. And so I started dyeing more of this pastel variegated Eevee-like base coat. So that way I would have enough of the yarn dyed to then go ahead and do our next layer of color. To help me keep track of the different bases, I dyed the Crazy DK and the Krypton 7525 stock yarn at the same time. And then I dyed the Crazy 8 worsted yarn with the Krypton fingering, that's just the 100% superwash merino base, at the same time. So that way there wouldn't be any confusion for me which yarn was DK, which was fingering weight, which was a nylon blend, and which wasn't. Another thing you can do if you're dyeing multiple bases on one day and you really want to make sure that you're keeping track and separate bases that otherwise might appear very similar is that you can label the zip ties either by color, or sometimes I label them with numbers, letters, an initial, or even a symbol to help keep track of the different yarn bases. I think this is the palette for our 8 evolutions. Now, unlike some of the other colors I've done throughout this series, I did not go to the Dharma swatches to pick my colors. I went through some of the crude swatches I have done of purples, pinks, blues, greens to help me narrow down the colors. Now, Frozen Blue is actually in Speckles going to be a lot brighter than the swatch indicates, and Sea Spray is sort of a more muted blue-green, but the version of Sea Spray I'm going to be using is actually a newer one that is slightly more blue than the one that I've used in the past, but the old one still has the card on it, so that's why I had that there for now. And I picked this a little bit in part because I thought it was fun that the more blue color for our Glaceon is an ocean reference, and then the blue for our Vaporeon, the water Pokemon, is an ice reference. I liked that. I put on my deluxe rubber respirator mask, safety glasses, and gloves to start mixing our dyes with citric acid powder. To prep our dyes, I added 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid powder into a little 10 milliliter spice jar. And then to that, I added a tiny scoop of dye that is 1/32 of a teaspoon, I believe. But in general, the approximate ratio is that there's about 16 times as much citric acid as there is acid dye. That seems big. Well, we'll try that, and we can always add more dye and adjust. I didn't pre-soak this Swish DK yarn mop in any acid, so the only acid here so far is the acid that came with our shakers. Our other yarn had an acid pre-soak. And if I'm moving my hand as I'm sprinkling, that should also help spread the dye out a little bit more. Only the yellow doesn't really give as sharp defined speckles. We know this color can speckle, but it's just harder to see the boundaries of the color with this particular one. Okay, and we're also going to get a feel of if I went too heavy or not. I'm going to let this sit for a couple of minutes to give the colors a chance to soak into the yarn. Okay, and here we have our colors. We've got our True Black, Cayenne Red, Sour Apple, Brilliant Yellow, Sea Spray, Lilac, Frozen Blue, and Valentine Blush. I think that these colors work really well together, but I do think that I want to add more citric acid to each of the jars. I mean, the only one that maybe wouldn't need it would be the Valentine and the Lilac, maybe the Frozen, but I would like to allow the dyes to spread out a little bit more. So off camera, I'm gonna add another 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid powder to each of my little shakers, stir it up with a clean stir stick, and then we're gonna start speckling onto our brown base that we dyed yesterday. As I went to go add a little bit more citric acid powder to like my storage jar where it's easier to scoop out, I noticed that the original, and likely because it was food grade citric acid, is more finely milled than the citric acid that I got from Dharma, which has a larger crystal size. So the new, I guess, citric acid that I'll be adding to each container is going to be this chunkier stuff. So we're gonna have like a 50-50 mix of the citric acid, some that is thicker, and so I'm not sure how that might make any differences on the yarn, but we want to look at the bill size when it comes to speckles mixed with citric acid. That is something we can play with at a later date. We are going to work quickly and efficiently, and I think we're going to dye
200 grams of yarn at a time, so that way I can spread things out a lot. This should, in theory, help us only have to apply dye to the yarn twice. So we can apply dye, flip, apply dye, take it to the steamer basket, and rinse, repeat. If I had more yarn over here, then I would have to make things even more crowded. And I will adjust the camera. Now, I believe I can probably fit 4 skeins into my steamer basket at any given time, but I'm going to take 1 jar. And speckle. Take another jar, another location, and speckle. And I am feeling some of those thicker pieces of citric acid come out. Now, I'm not worrying about the order of the colors that I'm speckling. I'm doing it a little bit randomly, and the order when I flip and speckle on the other side will also be different. But hopefully I didn't add too much citric acid in. Oh, because this might be a little bit of a problem for me if things aren't going to absorb into the water or like into the yarn quickly. It might take a little bit of time. I did squeeze some liquid out of the yarn before I brought it over, and I'm thinking that may have been a mistake because some of these larger crystals might take more time. Now for the last color, I need to see if there's a little bit of a gap. Did I go all the way over here yet? I don't think so. It's hard to tell. But I think I'm going to have to give this a moment to give these dyes time to sink in. Well, that I didn't count on. I'm used to things sinking in a little bit faster. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes and then we're going to come back.
I think the answer is that I don't need to tiptoe. There are visible speckles in many places. I just need to, I think, not go super light because then they don't really show up. So for this prototype round, I went with all the colors again, realizing that things were heaviest when I first dumped the shaker. So keeping that in mind, I tried to vary it up, and I didn't worry about doing the same colors in the same place. I just tried to get a little more coverage overall.
I'm not going to wait this time. I am going to pick up our yarn, carefully flip it over so we can expose some of this without color. And we're going to steam set this one soon, and if we need to, we can always add more dye. But the goal with flipping and everything is to not rub it, because we don't want to like spread out the colors too much. Now, with what I think is the black, that one we don't necessarily need to be as heavy. I really should start at one end and work my way down instead of working in the middle. But I think one problem we might be having is that I sort of got the dye all around. I got the dye to go around the citric acid that was finer milled, and now I think our chunkier citric acid might be gatekeeping that a little bit. It's hard to say for sure, but that could be what is happening. And now the thing that is important to me here is that the colors, and as I'm adding the colors on, it's a very random overall order. And that means that it's not going to be like green, yellow, or red. like that, it's going to be a lot more random overall. And I'm keeping track of things. And you know, we can even do a little bit of that. Keeping track of things by physically moving the dyes from one container to another. So that way I can attempt to get a little bit all over on our yarn. And I think I went heavier and I can see a little bit of the colors on here this time. So now what I'm going to do is carefully lift up our yarn and I'm going to go place it in a steamer basket and steam set for 30 minutes. And we definitely have dye on the counter. We're going to wipe this up both with our yarn mop, but then I'm also going to, I think, well, we'll try wiping it with a paper towel, not to dry it necessarily, but just to help keep it so that way when we add new yarn on initially, we aren't going to immediately like smear color on. At least that is my plan. I didn't wait to finish steam setting the first set of 2 before diving into a second set of 2. And this time I just went heavier. I didn't squeeze out as much water from the yarn initially, so it was a little bit more saturated. That helped some of those dyes sink in a little bit faster, but could also conceivably make things spread a little bit more. I then flipped the yarn, added all 8 colors to the other side in a random order. Yes, maybe I tried a little bit to not have things end up on the same place, but this will help randomize the way that the colors come through on the yarn. I then put the yarn directly in a steamer basket, wiped off the work surface with the yarn mop, and then a paper towel. And now I'm going to wait, so that way we can see what all of the yarn looks like. Because depending on how this went, if I like the results of the prototype, but specifically the second round that I did here, then we can continue to do this, but after we do like the first batch, we put it in the steamer basket and then do more, and we can put that in the same steamer basket, which will up the rate of production, because right now each batch is in its own steamer basket. Let's check on our prototype. Super, super steamy. And, ooh, I see speckles. I don't know if you can see them. I see speckles in all kinds of colors. I think this is great. This is great. Okay, it worked, I think. I'm gonna set this aside so it can cool and we can take a closer look. But we also have a second batch that just needs a few more minutes in the pot. Let's be honest, we all know that when I'm speckling, as time goes on, my hand gets heavier and heavier. And okay, this one is heavier. And what's funny is that I do see all the colors here. I see some yellow, some green. The black and red seem to be the heaviest so far, but I mean, it worked. I'm going ahead and squeezing. You can see how much more water we had in this one. I'm gonna squeeze a bunch of that out and let it cool for a minute or two so we can come in a little closer. This really did work. The colors are subtle, and I've sort of looped it around a little bit so that way you can really see them all, because ultimately it's so subtle because they're speckles. What we're seeing mostly is the sort of brown base that we started with, which feels a little bit subtle as well now. Maybe this particular one was one where the colors were a little more subtle, but I think from far away it looks like a bit of a neutral, but you feel like a little bit of those colors. Here are the skeins where I was a little heavier handed, and the one color that doesn't show up quite as well, I think, as all the rest are the pink and the purple. Everything else I can see really, really well. I mean, the lilac breaks. The pink is there. It is there, and so is the purple. They're just a little bit more subtle than some of these other colors. But It's worked. It's worked. I hope people will really like this. It's very different. It's quite different from anything I think I've dyed before. And I don't think it's going to be too busy. I think that it'll be mostly a neutral, but occasionally you'll get like a little fleck of color. And I'm here for it. I think that the base, it's funny because the base could have been more saturated, but then the speckles wouldn't really show up. So I'm not sure, but I think whether I go a little bit heavier with the speckles, if I'm doing heavier, if I know I have the pink or purple, then maybe I want to pump it up, but this worked. I'm happy. And now it's time for me to ramp up production here. 2 skeins at a time. I speckled heavily on one side, heavily on the other, put them on the steamer basket, wiped down the counter, and then did the same thing on 2 more skeins. Adding those to the same steamer basket as the first, and then setting the timer for 30 minutes. This kind of cycle means that I can, in quick succession, prep 8 skeins and then have less waiting in between. And so I'm happy with the direction that this is going. And I believe that I've mixed enough dye with that ratio of 1 teaspoon of citric acid to 1/32, I believe. It's either 1/16 or 1/32. I'll have an affiliate link to the little spoons down in the video description, but that ratio is something that I can measure and reproduce. So that way if I run out of any of the colors, I can get more of that dye and easily mix that up so I can carry on and continue dyeing our yarn. I will need to dye more of this colorway. I think that I started with a batch of 20. I have a couple other of the yarn bases I mentioned in the intro that I still need to dye as well. But I'm happy that I have something that is scalable and that I didn't have to wait 10 minutes in between each flip. That made me nervous. Let's wash our cooled off speckled yarn. At least our first 4 skeins. Alright, I'm not expecting it to see any color bleeding, but one thing I do like to do is just shift the zip tie position a little bit whenever I've been dealing with dry dye powder. But ooh, that's so pretty right there. It's so subtle. Ooh, we got some like really good itty bitty speckles in here. Ooh, and I mean there's some that spread, but there's some great small sharp ones. It almost, what's funny is that part of me is looking at this and feeling like I've got a tweed yarn going on, which is not often a feeling I get whenever I do speckles, but this was fun, and this is a very different way for me to speckle, using so many different colors and not going too all over. Did I add soap yet? I don't remember. I've been dyeing a lot of yarn today. Let's add some dish soap. But again, I'm not anticipating any color bleeding. Yeah, so I am going to go ahead and rinse out the soap. Then I am going to put the yarn through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll come back with some conclusions. Here are just a few skeins of the Eevee yarn. In our sock yarn, the 75-25 superwash merino nylon, and then the 100% superwash merino DK. There is a lot of variation with how heavy I was with the speckles, but they look so cute. Of all the colors, I think that the pink and the purple are 2 of the most subtle. The background browns also are incredibly subtle. Ironically, the decay on the left looks like it has more pigment than the fingering weight yarn that is on the right. When it came to our depth of shade colors, this middle skein, this middle depth of shade, was the one that I picked for the color Fawn, and I see that represented in the yarn. Even though I don't think I used quite as much because the Fawn ended up being a little bit more spotty, that just worked. And then with the Pecan Brown, I aimed for the lightest depth of shade to give sort of a sandy color, but one that isn't really the same color as bear yarn. And for color reference, there is a skein of bear yarn. So the really low, I think it was a 0.01-ish
depth of shade of the Pecan Brown is very, very pastel, but does change the tone. And then our 0.125% depth of shade of the Fawn definitely has more of a punch. And don't worry, I'll show all the depths of shade labeled and twisted up off of the background of our Evolutions yarn in a moment. But oh my goodness, the breaking in that purple is so pretty. It was so much fun to see the differences between our very cool toned brown and then a very warm toned brown at similar depths of shade. And so sometimes looking at this can be really helpful when you're trying to pick colors for a project. Now, I think that if I was going to do a yarn that was just about the Eevee, I would go for our deepest brown, and then maybe a little bit of this medium with, you know, some of the pale in there. I think that that is sort of the way I would do it. But I didn't want to go too deep with the browns for this video because I wanted there to be a base, a neutral base that evoked the essence of the Eevee that is going to transform, and then little elements that represent all of the different evolutions it could become. The other thing I sort of want to comment on right now is that I recently shared a video where I try to mix my own brown out of primary colors. And looking at this, I want to mix them together and see what we get in the middle. Because Pecan Brown is very gray, Fawn is very orange, and I think that the midpoint could be really cool. So do you want to see me play around with that? Let me know down in the comments. With our yarn all twisted up, you can see the neutrals with these flecks of color. And in some, I definitely was more heavy-handed than others, but overall, they are all quite speckly, and I am very happy about that. We did have 2 different yarn mops from this video. And in these, you can see little bits of all the colors, but there's also areas like down here where all of the colors muddied together because we had 8 different colors that we were layering on top of each other as I wet in my gloves. Plus, not all the pigments always stick to the gloves as well. Don't get me wrong, these mops are still very, very beautiful. It's just, I'm amused because when I worked on the main skeins, we used so many colors. And again, the one that maybe is a little hard to pick out is the pink, because I think in some cases the pink speckles are presenting rather red, and then the red is a sort of warm orange leaning red. But there are instances of the pink in here. But you do get a feel for all of those colors. Sure, the yellow doesn't necessarily look like speckles because of just the way that color works, but you can see it, it's there. And even layered on top of those browns with the base, each of these colors with speckles shows through. They don't feel muddy, and for that, I am thrilled and I'm in love with the project. And now I have a lot more yarn to go twist up, so we'll step back in a moment. But first, here I have our 2 yarn mops twisted in between 2 of the other skeins. And this is definitely a case where I like the yarn mops more when I see them twisted up than I did laying flat. I love getting to see all these little pops of color. All right, here's the first set of 20, and I dyed all of these on one day. And now here are the 12 other skeins. So here is our Crazy 8 DK 100% superwash merino wool. The Crazy 8 worsted is also 100% superwash merino wool. And the one main thing I noticed that's the difference between the second batch and the first batch is that I did a much better job spreading out the speckles. The speckles are more spread out across the yarn overall and a little bit less clumped, maybe? Not that it's a big deal, but often I find myself going heavier and heavier and heavier with the dyes as I go through a project. And I think I was a little lighter on this second batch that I did 2 weeks or so later. So there was enough time in between that my hand got lighter again. You can see how my hand is a little bit heavier here on the Krypton sock. This is the 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, dyed as part of that first big batch. And then we have Krypton fingering, which is 100% superwash merino wool. And we definitely do still have like our yellows in here too. I'm not seeing? There, I see some right there. I was like, I know it's there because I added every color to every skein. But the color is super subtle and really, really lovely. I will say this Krypton fingering weight yarn is unbelievably soft. I don't think I have a superwash merino fingering weight yarn that I love. Like, I like the swish line from Knit Picks, but I'm not a huge fan of swish fingering. Mainly because I think the very first batch of swish fingering was not as soft as the other swishes. I think that's changed, but it's very lofty, I think. I should dye that, actually. I'll make a note. Editing Rebecca will make a note to finally do a video with that. Dyed this Krypton, like, it is so silky and soft. Now the sock yarn with nylon is also really, really soft, and I really, really like it. But something about this is just so soft and wonderful. When I zoom out, you can't really see, well, maybe I will notice when editing, because when I zoom out, I'm looking at a image that's only a couple inches wide on the monitor versus like on my laptop screen, which is going to be a lot bigger. So maybe from there, I'll feel like I see all these speckles a little bit more. But I'm in love, whether they're a little bit chunkier, like over on the left, or a little bit softer, like on the right. This did what I was wanting it to do. And I really wanted to create a colorway with all these different colors without them blending in together and without losing the base as well. Because I was a little afraid if I did too much green, and if I did like without citric acid, I could end up with that green spreading and taking over. And so I am just really, really proud of this yarn. And I really, really hope that you like it. Here I have one of the Krypton fingering bases that I kept for myself. And I don't know if you could see the speckles from this far away, but they are so soft, so restrained compared to the way I normally speckle that I adore it. And I want to try this kind of technique with the shakers, dyeing colors in one order on one side, another order on the other, more in the future as a way to, yes, speckle all over, but not have all colors all over and really obsess about the placement. When I was first thinking about this whole series, I thought about, ooh, I want to create a colorway that I call Evolutions. And this has evolved from some of my original visions, which involved louder patches of all of the colors. But I wanted to try to create something that felt different from what I've created before. And realizing that we have all these colors, all the potential of the evolutions in here, but from far away, you're getting that softness. It's actually kind of the color of like the ruff. My costume has a ruff. My Halloween costume. I'll put a picture up there. And that's more of this color of the yarn. So really, this is an Eevee colorway. It has that potential in there to evolve, but it really is just its beautiful, adorable little self that likes to sit on your shoulder. I love this colorway as a fun neutral and am so excited to play around with this more. And I also have a feeling that I might need to dye more Eevee yarn in the future. At the time I'm filming this, the first night of the SMSMS was last night, and the comments already had a bunch of people hoping for Eevee, which had me so excited. I can't even tell you. I adore hanging out in the live chat during these special series. And if you want to get a fun badge next to your name and access to the really fun ChemKnits themed emotes, you can join to become a channel member. And it's just a fun way to like express yourself in the comments section, because it doesn't just have to be in a live chat. You can use all the emotes down in the comments of my videos as well. And it just makes me smile. I don't currently have any emotes that are on deck that I haven't added, but the more members we get, then the more slots open up, and so then I can commission an artist to make some more. So if you have any requests or suggestions there, leave those down in the comments too. This is the last yarn dyeing video of the Spring Mini Skein mini series. but that we have one video left. There is a vlog that'll go behind the scenes of the whole series. You'll see all the different mini skein sets together, and I'll show off the packaging and the fun extras that I made, thoughts that were going through my head throughout the whole process, and more. I don't do vlogs like this very often, but since when I'm working on these series, I have to like hold everything in and I can't share any of what I'm working on, it's a nice outlet for me to just share what's going on in my head throughout the whole process, and I really hope you guys enjoy it. So please make sure you're subscribed and turn on notifications, because outside of special events like this and Hanukkah, I post videos at least twice a week, and sometimes we have last minute live streams, and so with your notifications on, maybe YouTube will let you know so you don't miss the stream. I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who bought yarn for this series. I know there's a big leap of faith and trust in me when you buy something not knowing what it's going to be. And these special series are really just a huge way that I help support all the content that I do here. And so thank you so much to all of you who have participated through buying yarn, watching these videos, commenting. All of this helps a lot, and thank you. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and thank you so much for watching.